All right, great. Great. Well, welcome back. And we have a few new people on board today, which is always good. 40 people for this. That's amazing to me. It's amazing to me. I feel so grateful about that. Okay, well, I'm going to flip on the screen share for a minute, just for folks who are catching this later, just so they can have a little look at a template here. We're going to be following this map as far as you can follow maps today. And if you're watching this later on YouTube or something, you could pause it, take a screenshot of that if you want, or it just at least gives you an idea of how we're going to be proceeding. I remember in 1977 when the Spectrum of Consciousness came out by Ken Wilber. Wilber was a Duke dropout. He dropped out of Duke Medical because he didn't feel like he was learning enough in his classes. And so he just started washing dishes and writing a book a year, basically, for a long time. And the first book was The Spectrum of Consciousness. It's now 45 years since Ken Wilber put that book out, where he did some breakthrough looking at just the whole spectrum of consciousness. And it basically broke into, he had it in 9 levels, but those 9 levels really broke into 3. And the first 3 levels were what he called pre-rational. And that's where we're going to go when we talk about tier 1 consciousness. That's pre-rational consciousness. And then the middle tier was 3 more levels of consciousness, which are called the rational. And that's our tier 2 consciousness. And then he broke it into the last tier 3 into 3 levels, but that was trans-rational. We have the ability to bring all that on. And I want to talk about it through a slightly different lens. 600 years before Ken Wilber, there was a medieval author who we don't know who he was, because he wrote this anonymously. He was probably a monk somewhere in the Midlands of England, because it's written in Middle English, which was sort of a new language, and it was the same time as Chaucer, the same time as Julian of Norwich is at that time, like one of the great saints of all time. And it was a time of the plague, where about half of the people in England lost their lives due to the bubonic plague, what was called the Black Plague. And so it's sort of timely, because sometimes times of great tumult are also times of great breakthrough. Just as, we've gone through COVID for a couple of years, and that brought us together in this format, which for me was a great breakthrough. 40 people here from all over the place, able to get together and think about the great chain of consciousness. So we're gonna, the anonymous author, the book became known as The Cloud of Unknowing, and was pretty much unknown until it was, they did some Trappist monks, Bill Menninger and Basil Pennington, and then finally the great, I call him a spiritual archaeologist, Thomas Keating. Those 3, they sort of resurrected this teaching, this understanding of consciousness, and also the teaching of contemplation in the Christian dimension. That wasn't there when I was looking for some way to go further with consciousness. That's why I started with Suzuki Roshi and the Zen guys, because there wasn't really anything on out to be had in terms of Christian contemplation. Of course, Merton was writing in the 60s. Merton sort of single-handedly woke up these other Trappists and woke up a lot of people when he said he brought forth a whole different language and brought contemplation almost single-handedly back. Well, a little more on that, but I'm going to drop off the screensaver for now so we can get our screen back up. There we go. And we'll just sort of jump into it. How you see is what you see. That is the great phenomenology. It's just the study of how we know anything. So how you see is what you see is one of the great tenets of that. And what we've got before us is what I want to go through with us is using the cloud of knowing's simplified form. You could read Ken Wilber, and it's to great effect. But basically, we have 4 operating systems and I like that metaphor because we understand operating systems with computers. We have 4 of these different operating systems that are front loaded in every human being in my book. And they're waiting there to be upgraded to. And the first operating system we'll look at first, what's called the lower active by the author of the cloud. By the way, once one of these is activated, it's always on. Even when you upgrade, there's elements of the lower operating system there. So once it's activated, it's always there and available. Available sometimes in a positive way, hopefully, and then sometimes in a negative way. But so we want to run through all these and at least show you the potential of how you can see the world. Because when you go from operating system to operating system, your view of the world changes. So let's start with tier 1. I'll read you the brief paragraph from the Cloud of Unknowing, which is Cynthia Bourgeault got me into reading this myself, and this particular translation, I've got 3 translations. This particular one was done a couple years ago, 2009, by Carmen Butcher, is the one I like the best. But my first real serious teacher, Ira Progoff, who was a transpersonal psychologist, who taught me the journaling process, and I actually worked with him for 7 years doing the intensive journal. I met some of you, a few of you, when I was actually a consultant for that. That's how I made so many contacts in Tennessee. I was working, doing that journal and giving retreats down there, which was my initial connection to Tennessee. Well, he actually wrote a great translation of this in the 50s. This is from a little more modern translation by a woman who's now at Berkeley, Carmen Butcher, and I like it. Let me just read a little bit of a paragraph. He says, there's 2 kinds of lives, the active and the contemplative. The active life is lower, the contemplative higher, and both have 2 stages, also a lower and a higher. These 2 lives are complementary and so bound together that although each is quite distinct, neither can exist without the other. The higher stage of the active life is also the lower stage of the contemplative life. That's why you can't be truly active unless you can participate in the contemplative life, and you can't be fully contemplative unless you participate in the active life. And he says the active life starts and ends on earth, but the contemplative life begins on earth and never ends. So there's something very interesting there, because we tend to, make a dichotomy. You're an activist or you're a contemplative. We put people in these categories, but the anonymous author of the cloud says, no, they depend on each other. And they're intricately connected to each other. And when you look at this intersection of these two circles that we have, basically that middle section, which looks sort of like maybe a football or an almond or whatever, that shape in plane geometry is called the mandorla. That means the interface of two circles, and especially in Eastern Orthodox tradition, they often show Jesus in that shape, turned sort of sideways, like longwise, and he appears in a lot of icons in that shape, because he is, from an Eastern Orthodox point of view, he is the integration of the divine and human. He's the link, and then we'll go towards that. But so let's start at the pre-rational level. We all have this. It kicks on when we're born, because for one thing, we don't have the development of the left hemisphere to the point where we can actually, they always said in Catholic teaching that 7 was the age of reason. Well, there's probably something to that based on physiology and the development of the left brain. Okay, it's not that developed when we come out. So we've got this lower active that he calls, or our first operating system. And if you're working with this grid, the operating system there is a survival operating system, and it's instinctual. Okay, it's based on instinct, and it's based on emotion that connects with instinct. We all have that, because as a child, and it was beautiful because it enabled us to make some sense of this chaos when we came out of our mother's womb into air, breathing air, into a huge space, coming out of our tiny little condo in our mommy's tummy. And all of a sudden there's bright lights, there's huge beings running around. It's totally overwhelming. I mean, this is our initial trauma of birth. And how am I going to survive? So this is the survival operating system. And we're working on instinct. Now, the motivation here is fear, pure fear. How am I going to survive? And this is picked up for you guys studying the Enneagram. This is point 6. It's about survival, security. Okay, and that's the first thing that comes up to everybody. How am I going to survive? And then the brilliance of this is we realize that, hey, that woman over there who, she can feed me. And so we find a way to get there. We're heading that way. And so the initial aspiration, because we're going to work on this, we're going to talk about the operating system, survival operating system. We're going to talk about the motivation, the push behind it, is fear, because I'm going to die if I don't get fed. I'm going to die here. I don't know how even to survive. And who are these big beings? If you had older siblings, I mean, I have people on this thing who were born into the family. They have 5 older brothers or whatever, all running around, and then father and mother. And how did you deal with that? Well, it's sort of scary. So we're starting in fear, and I would just want to survive. So the aspiration there is very instinctual at the being. It's a basic aspiration. I want to avoid pain. I'm hungry, and I want to seek pleasure. So that's the aspiration of the lower active, and it's in everybody. And it had a terrific survival value. We want to, if we're hungry, that's painful. We cry, whatever we do to get mommy to pick us up, and she feeds us, hopefully. And then we learn, we bring on the 2, 3, 4 part of the Enneagram thing then, because we realize, okay, this is mommy. If she likes me, she's going to feed me more. So we learn how to smile, we learn how to get her attention, et cetera, et cetera. My brothers and the older siblings and my daddy likes me, I'm more likely to survive. So we start developing, this is the instinctual operating system. It's the very surface of the Enneagram shows us that. So now we learn how to cultivate affection and esteem. This is the first couple of years we're just working on learning how to survive and how to get our family to like us. That's had terrific survival value. And then, somewhere around that, maybe 2, we developed this ability to separate a little bit, and we would develop this, we call it the terrible twos, but we developed this thing of me do it, I'm feeding myself, that all goes on. And so now then we're at the top of the Enneagram, we're bringing on this third instinctual energy, which is just power control. See, so we got survival, we got esteem, and then we got control. We have these things that are brought up. That's key for this instinctual energy system. If you listen to Thomas Keating's teaching, it's a lot on this, because this is pre-rational. And when things happen, we're all somewhat rational now. At least we've been to school, we know how to do math and verbal, and we know how to think linearly and whatever. But we also have this computer down there, that this other system, that when our survival is frustrated, when they frustrate our survival expectations, that sets off a little bomb. And then if somebody frustrates our affection and esteem needs, what we should be getting sets off a bomb. And then, when we're out of control, the situation or a person takes over control, that sets off that bomb. When all three of them go off, it's when you go nuclear. It's when I go nuclear. Then I'm really dangerous, because I'm not rational now. We all know this. And I've been there and I'll be there again. So there's always the ability, depending on the situation, you can drop into that lowest operating system that's pre-rational. And it's totally beneficial up to about the age of 6. But as you grow older, it has less and less efficacy for your happiness. And it certainly is not an operating system that you can live in and get happy with, that you can even achieve happiness, because there's never enough survival, there's never enough security, there's never enough affection and esteem, if that's your deal, and there's never enough power and control. The whole Ukraine thing is we're operating at, it's coming out of the lower active. It's coming about fear, and you can look at Ukraine through this lens, and it's very interesting. People there are at the survival level, and yet some of those people, it's so amazing, some of those people are doing things that put their own life at risk to help others. Quite amazing. You're not locked into it. So that's the first one. It's emotional, it's self-centered, and if that's all you have, and some people can live pretty much in that operating system, under their whole life. You meet people in their 70s who are living in that operating system. They only barely have come up to, let's go up to the second one, the higher active. That operating system is a strategic operating system, because when you get your left brain on, you can strategize. You can look in the future and look in the past, compare things, and lay strategy. It's sort of, you start to develop like a mind that can play chess with life, you see. So it's the strategic operating system. You still have the survival one that could be triggered at any point. And this is an egoic mental operating system. The second tier is mental, as opposed to instinctual and emotional. There's two levels of it, but this is basically mental. It's also internal. The lower active, our childhood operating system is external. We're constantly, the external world is playing the tune and we're reacting to it. It's reactive, and it's totally fear-based, because you come out as this little person, the known universe seems huge. Yeah, that's what starts our kind of I-it relationship, and that it is very big and we're very small. So whenever you go back into it, you're back in that relationship. Now the higher active, when you go into the mental realm, this is where the Buddha starts out, because he said, this is the realm of self-reflection. This whole mandorla in the middle, this second tier is we can reflect. That the initial Buddha genius was, he said, maybe, just maybe, it's not all about the furniture out there in the living room and just trying to change the externals. Maybe the reason nobody is all that happy, and Buddha was in northern India. They had all lots of religious texts and religious people, but people weren't all that happy. There was wars going on at the time of the Buddha. So he said, maybe the problem is that we're looking out here for everything. So these next two operating systems have to do with turning the lens inside a little bit, and so you can reflect on yourself. Instead of self-centeredness, there's a little bit of self-reflection, okay? And it's internal. So the strategic operating system, the hierarchy, and it's egoic mental, they would call it. Now the motivation there is still fear and love. Love's starting to come on. Just that energy, that's something other than fear. The aspiration becomes different. It's an upgrade. The aspiration in lower, the higher active is improvement, with the sort of emphasis on self-improvement. Not necessarily, but usually, we start off like, gee, we suffered, you suffer at some point. Maybe it comes on in junior high, which is a great place of necessary suffering. I taught there for 20 years. But suffering moves you through this necessary suffering. It's a lot of random unnecessary suffering. Again, Ukraine and just your own life. But necessary suffering tends to move you across these boundaries into an upgrade. And so who knows how that happens. Usually happens in grade school. If it happens normally for most of us, there's necessary suffering. All of a sudden you're not at home. I was in a class with 60 kids. I was not the little golden child around the house that everybody doted on. Now I was just 1 of 60. That's a huge bit of suffering right there. And especially when you have some nuns that are twisted, which I had. I had some great nuns, but I had some crazy nuns too. So it's, so you're trying to improve yourself. And this is good because, you're just saying, well, all right, I'm going to get my stuff together. And so that's where, it's in the place of self-improvement where people decide to start working on themselves. That's good. So you're trying to constantly improve yourself. Maybe there's 7 guides to doing that or this and that or whatever. It's mostly self-improvements, is the sort of the aspiration. I want to get better. I was just a little perfectionist. I just wanted to win all the awards, however it works out. Doesn't quite cut it though. And so you hit, before you move up to lower contemplative or the next operating system, you're going to suffer some more. But no matter how much I tried, I didn't get 100 on every paper. And then there's just other kinds of necessary suffering. A good way to understand the transition, and this is all a spectrum, so it's much more subtle than you just go from one to the other like click. It's like we're all on the spectrum. That doesn't mean we're all autistic. That's how people use that term now. They say, well, I think he's on the spectrum. He's somewhere on the autistic or spectrum, but we're all on the spectrum of consciousness, and it's very fine-tuned, and there's a lot of back and forth. But when more necessary stuff, as much as you try to improve, you got to move on from that.
Minutes, he'll be finished, and I'll move out.
Okay, I'll go downstairs.
Okay.
Somebody's got a mute there, whoever's
Sorry.
on there. Yeah, okay. Thanks. Now here's a good example of how necessary suffering tends to, this is just one example how it tends to happen to people. All right, you're rolling along, got a job, maybe you're making great success, proving everything, your life, you're making more money, whatever, but you're drinking a lot to deal with the stress, and all of a sudden you crash and, you lose everything maybe, your alcohol taken away. That's just one example. There could be a bunch of ways to try to, again, avoid pain and seek pleasure. And, stress it's not pleasant. That's what got me into the thing, was I was so stressed out teaching junior high. And I was looking for a way out. But let's assume that you're an alcoholic, and you've lost everything. That happens to people. Um, that's a kind of necessary suffering that can propel you into the next operating system. Maybe you go to 12 steps. That's brilliant, because that's what happens. You're looking for a deeper spirituality after you hit this kind of wall, or end up, on the ground. You're looking for a kind of spirituality. And the 12 steps, brilliant. I mean, it's the only thing Americans have ever invented that it wasn't already invented. And so you go into 12 steps. Now, maybe at first, it's like a kind of firewall against, relapse, against drinking itself. Well, great. It keeps you sober. Great. But little by little, as you work the steps, especially as you get to step 11, it's about having a relationship with some kind of higher power, because you've understood people go to AA, relapse, go to AA, relapse, and the other 12-step things that are based on AA, sometimes it's a third time around. And then you realize finally, I can't do it. See, this is a huge step. Maybe not even in 12 steps, but at some point you realize your ego is not strong enough. There's more than your ego. There's more than me. And so you realize you need to have a relationship, a closer relationship with what they call it AA, the higher power. You could call it whatever, but there's got to be something bigger than me, and I gotta find out a way to have a relationship with that, and that's a big change, rather than kind of an I-it relationship with the world, with like a backslash between the two. Now it's still I-it when you go up to the lower contemplative, but that it, there's a hyphen, not a backslash. In other words, you want to have some kind of relationship, and that takes us up to the third operating system, the sacred operating system. So we got survival is on, we got the strategic operating system is on, but we're upgrading now to a sacred operating system. And where the first one's instinctual, and then there's an egoic. This one is iconic, is a good word for it. In other words, based on these icons I have, I have icons of Jesus, icons of Buddha. Icons are just a picture of somebody who is very important to you, and they're also considered doorways if you use them for meditation. So this is the third level, that there's some sacred thing, and sacred just means something bigger than my own ego. I know there's got to be a power, because I've been trying it on my own ego, and I keep relapsing. I'm not happy. So maybe there is something. Maybe there is something too. Yeah. So you're going from, maybe a kind of pro forma religion. Maybe you let go of that because it wasn't working. But now they're talking about a kind of deeper spirituality, and that would be the sacred operating system. Now the motivation there flips. It's not fear and love. Now it's love and fear. And that flipping is, there's still a lot of the fear present, of course, but love is the more dominant thing there. And the aspiration is different. It's not improvement now. No, it's healing. Because you've lived enough. You've hurt a number of people, and you've been wounded as well from birth on. And so the emphasis is not about improving yourself, it's about healing yourself. And you're starting to do meditation now, some form of meditation. You're starting to read not self-help books so much, but sacred texts, that might be centuries old. I started reading Suzuki's books strictly because he didn't look stressed. Maybe I could reach that level. That was, the higher active level, okay? But after a while, I realized he was aiming for something much bigger. So healing means to become not just cured, but whole. I'm working with someone now whose spouse is is in an act of dying. And, you know, you're not going to be cured when you're in this final roll to graduation, as the monks call it. There's nothing's going to stop that procession to the graduation stage. But what can happen is, so you can't be cured when you're in that runway because that would stop the process, but you can be healed totally. And that's an inner thing where all these parts of yourself that have been shaved off and thrown away because they didn't jive with the family or with the tribe that you grew up with, or whatever. Now all of a sudden they come back together. And this is where it comes with meditation, with more serious spiritual practice. Most of you wouldn't be here if you hadn't activated that operating system already. That's why you're here, because somehow along the way, these got activated. And so now the aspiration here is healing. So look at our aspirations, from avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, to improving myself, and also improving the world too. In the higher active, you can actually, this is where in Christianity, they talk about the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. So you can actually start to feel like, I want to help other people too. Well, that's good. See, that's all good stuff. But when you come up here, it's not so much fixing the world, it's healing the world and healing yourself first. Healing yourself first. I mean, you look out at what's going on in Ukraine. I mean, it's going on in several other places all the time, because world consciousness, this war in Ukraine is not even rational. And so we're talking about you get rid of Putin, get rid of Biden. That depends on your politics, get rid of democracy, totalitarianism, or something else. It doesn't make any difference if the consciousness does not expand, you see, because these wars are made by people who are really primarily in the lower active, and maybe in the higher active because they can strategize, but there's still, its fear is in control, you see. And we live in, we got political race coming up. Notice the fear. Notice all the fear we live in. But when, it's you got to just notice it before you could actually work with it yourself. We're in a consumer culture. They don't even consider us human beings or citizens. We're consumers. And the best environment to make people consume is to have them constantly be afraid, you see. So there's a lot of forces working on us to keep us, in those lower two. Yeah, and if you're here on a Saturday, you've already activated the lower contemplative. Okay, how stable is that? I go through all of these systems, but where do you stably hang out with? That's a good question, because you could go all the way back down to the bottom in given situation. I have and will again, I'm sure. But it's a question of where you normally hang out and what you're doing. So you're here. Okay. Now the interesting thing when we go to the last, the highest stage, is beyond this sacred operating system, which is basically iconic. We have these iconic people like Jesus and Buddha that they're like pioneers. Even your teachers, they've showed you a way, and so that's why I have their pictures here, because they remind me, oh well, there's something higher than just feeling good about myself. Beyond this point, there is no map, but there is a compass. Now that's important. See, that's important. Beyond this point of the lower contemplative, where we're looking to follow the way that's laid out, which is helpful, is really helpful. But beyond this point, there is no map, but there is a compass. And that's an important way to look at it, because when you're talking about the higher contemplative, no map. It's totally unique. When you go beyond this point, you're in terrain. This is what the book, The Cloud of Anointing, gets its name from, because when you go into this last operating system, it's like being in a cloud. Can't even read a map. It's totally, it's like walking off the edge of a cliff. You're held up by something, but you don't know what it is. So let's look at the higher contemplative. It's what's called, and Cynthia Bourgeau introduced this to me, it's called the operating system of the heart. This is what it means to be working with the heart operating system. And that is, interestingly enough, that is holistic, means that the heart operating system sees everything as a whole. And it's, I call it holistic resonance, because also resonance is, the root of that word is to resound. And so that gets you into the image that the contemplative tradition is called, listening with the ear of the heart. So there's a kind of resonance. You're working on resonance from the heart now, because you got no map here. And this is when you go into this realm, like when we, at 10 o'clock or 10:15, when we come back for a couple more periods of sitting formal contemplation, when I hit the gong, there is no map, you see. There's a practice, but it's more about holistic resonance. Now the motivation here is different. Remember, lower contemplative, there's love primary and fear secondary. As you work up, fear is all there is in the lower, and then there's fear, and then love starts to work into it. And then if they flip and love is primary, the reason you're here is primarily because of love, but there's fear is there too. Well, when you get to the activating the last operating system, the motivation is use the Greek word agape, A-G-A-P-E. The Greeks, interestingly enough, look this up. This will be helpful in your life. The Greeks have 9 words for love. A culture that values something, like the Eskimos have 54 words for snow, because they value snow. They've got to understand snow. Their survival depends on it. Well, we have 1 word. Love is a Subaru. I love McDonald's. But the Greeks really break it down, and agape is unconditional love. That's the only way to operate. Not picking and choosing. Jesus is talking about this. He says, you love God with everything you got, and then you love your neighbor as yourself. That's it. No, and he shows that in parable after parable. You don't just love the guys who are nice to you. Yeah. So it's agape, or unconditional love. Now the aspiration here is different too. You go from healing to transformation. This is the aspiration at the highest level. You be totally transformed. Well, what does that mean? Saint Irenaeus, who was born probably in Turkey, and then eventually 2nd century made his way even into France to around Lyon. But he said it first. He said the divine becomes human so the human can become divine. The divine becomes human so the human can become divine. So what transformation means is to become like this with the divine. And so there's no more an I-it relationship like it is when you get to the lower contemplative. Now it's an I relationship. Guys who've been here and written about it, Meister Eckhart says, the eye with which I see God is the eye with which God sees me. That's what the Hindus mean when they put their hands together and they say, Namaste. The God in me meets the God in you, you see. Okay. So this is the transformation, so that there's you're getting out of subject object reality. That's what the holism means. You're seeing everything as not at all the possibility of separation when you view through this lens, through this operating system. It's not there. And we've all been there. We've all had a little glimpse of that when everything came together, when you just feel like everything's right in the world. We've all had little glimpses of that even earlier on, that just something just perfect. There's not a, all's right with the world. Julian of Norwich, who reached this level and was stable at this level, she said, all will be well and all will be well and every manner of thing will be well. Well, that was her stable, Maestro was on a stable level there. Merton reached it towards the end of his life. It was, when he was on the street corner, he said, we're all shining like the sun. They could have been pimps, they could have been whores, they could have been politicians or lawyers. Who knows who he was seeing there? Just normal guys, knuckle draggers, as they call it. Who knows? He didn't, there's no distinction at that point. You see, when you have that operating system, you just see everybody with that potential. They're all shining like the sun. Well, what did that mean to Merton? Merton took the language further. He talked about the center. That's the term that they finally adopted for centering prayer. It just means you're trying to go towards the center. What's at that center? It's deep in the interior, and it's the true north. It's your true self. It's the spark of the divine, and it's in you. So when I say you're beyond this point, there are no maps, but there is a compass. That center is the compass. So with a compass, you might have no map, but the compass can show you where north is, where true north is, you see. And so the heart is this image of this kind of compass. And everybody has it without exception. Vladimir Putin has it. That's why you can't it's why you gotta love him. Because he's on this same thing, but he's just really stuck. He's still stuck in thinking, well, power and control, that'll make me happy. It never has once. Look at Hitler, he's, in the bunker. Everybody who follows that, they never make it, you see. But you gotta love the guy because he's like your, Uncle Vlad, who's just drunk all the time. I mean, you love him anyway. And if you're a Tibetan, you say, he's going to make it. Maybe not in this lifetime, you see. So you get here now. So now the aspiration is, I just want to transform myself. Other people have. St. Francis is one of the great examples. Thich Nhat Hanh just graduated. He was there. His word was interbeing. When you reach this level, you see everything as being connected. If you read any Thich Nhat Hanh, you see that image over and over. You cannot be separate, you see, which is what everybody's looking for. That's what we mean by home, where there's just not me in the world, but I'm at home, say. Cynthia Bourgeault says this. She says, what the need to go up to this higher contemplative? She says, trying to access God through the usual hardwiring of the mind, which is what we see in the middle part, the tier 2, trying to access God through the usual hardwiring of the mind is like trying to access the internet on your old Underwood typewriter. I had a Smith Corona. I didn't have an Underwood, but I knew people who did. We get that image, trying to access the transcendent, whatever you call it, access that power that's created all billions of galaxies and has pulled you through all these harrowing things. You've all had at least a sense once that something pulled me through this. To access that power, using the hardwiring of the mind is like trying to access the internet on your old manual typewriter. That's a great image of what the higher contemplative is about. Say, No, I'll just add, end with something from Seven Story Mountain early on before Merton had felt drawn against. It's totally a trans-rational drawing. The trans-rational is drawing us all up here, you see. This is, you know, from here down, it's all about we're driven by the ego. We're driven for survive. We're driven to improve. We're driven even to heal ourselves sometimes. But once you get up past that, the thing that's moving the whole thing, that's moving us all there, how many lifetimes, who knows, is the transcendent is drawing us in. So Merton was inexplicably, when he was at Columbia, with hanging around with all these, you know, you name it, intellectuals, really very smart guys. He felt drawn to become a Catholic. There was no sense in that. He had, you know, etc. But he got baptized on the quiet. Nobody knew about it because he was a little bit, didn't want these guys to know it because these guys didn't believe in anything. They were, you know, college intellectuals at that time. But Bob Lax, who was a Jew and who reverenced Judaism, he was walking down the street and he told Lax. Lax was the one guy he told. Lax was a very interesting guy in his own right. He told Lax, he said, well, yeah, I became a Catholic. And so Lax said, really? He said, well, all right. So now you've been baptized a Catholic. Yeah, he said, that's right. He said, well, now what are you going to do with it? Burton wasn't ready for this question. He said, what do you mean, what am I going to do with it? He said, what are you going to do with it? This baptism, what are you going to do with it? And Burton said, well, I guess I'll just, you know, be a good person. So he's at the higher active there, you know. He says, I don't know. I guess I could just be a good person and follow the rules. And Lax said, that's really lame. And he said, well, what should I do? And Lax said, he said, you should become a saint. And he said, well, you can't just, Bert said, you can't just become a saint by wanting to be a saint. And Lax says, nonsense, that's the only way. So then he's talking about the aspiration. And the aspiration of transformation, that's what's up in that, the people we call saints in all the traditions, Rumi and Sufism, Hafez, every tradition has these people who reach this third tier of consciousness, put halos around them because these guys are tapping not their own energy, they're connected to the internet, you see, the real internet. You know, they're in the iCloud. You know, they're somehow connected in a stable way. You know, you might have lost your connection to this program. That's what it's like as you come up. You can connect with it for a little while, and then you lose your connection. These guys had a stable connection to the transcendent. And it didn't matter the tradition. You find them in all traditions and in no traditions. You know, people who don't even have a tradition. Somehow people can get a stable connection to the transcendent, and then they live that way, and that's what we consider saints. And he said that's the only way that you can to have that aspiration. So, but there's no map. You have your hotspot right here at your deepest center, and you enables you to connect with this transcendent thing on a regular basis. And when we come back, you know, 10:15, we'll try to connect. It's just the same way you turn on your computer. Sometimes you can connect, sometimes you can't, depending on the circumstances. So we're gonna sit and just aspire to connect to the ultimate. The interesting thing is, you got to go beyond thought to do that. Again, remember the manual typewriter. You can't connect to the internet through words and thoughts. You can't connect into the transcendent net that way. And that's a different kind of sitting, you see. So we'll come back to that. So about 10:15, 10-minute break. Thanks for considering all this. Now you can write about it if you like, or just take a break from it all. Okay. See ya.